Hello. Today is the second Sunday of Easter, and we will be recording our service this morning on Facebook and on YouTube. But some of you may just want to access my talk this morning, so I thought I'd just record my talk separately for those who want to hear it. Today is the second Sunday of Easter, as I say, and today we also remember the story of doubting Thomas and that resurrection story. So I'm going to read you a little bit from that story from St. John's Gospel, chapter 20. Now Thomas, who was also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." There's a story in the Old Testament. It's a very familiar story and one I'm sure you'll all be aware of. It's the story of the Israelites escaping from Egypt. And as you know, the story goes that Moses is called by God to go to Pharaoh and set his people free. He goes to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." And eventually, after lots of plagues and locusts and all sorts of horrible things, the people of Israel escape from Egypt. But the story doesn't end there, of course. They escape out of Egypt, and as they go towards the Promised Land, as they approach the river, the Red Sea, they see the army of Israel attacking them. The Pharaoh decides to change his mind, and he sends the army of Israel back out to capture the Israelites. And so we have this moment, this great moment, in this moment of tension in the midst of all of this chaos. We see how the people of Israel are caught, they're trapped. They've reached the sea and they can't go any further. And behind them, they've got the army of army of Egypt chasing them. What are we going to do? Dlum, 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 dlum. There's a great moment of panic, fear, chaos. What's going to happen? It's one of those big sort of climax moments. What's the word? They can't. They don't know what's going on, and they're sort of like thinking, "Dum dum dum, what will happen?" And just in that moment, just at that moment of anxiety, of panic and fear, Moses stands up and says, "Stop. Do not be afraid. Stand firm," he says. "Stand firm, for the Lord is on your side." And then he says this: "All you have to do is be silent. All you have to do is be silent." Wow, what a moment. What a moment. There's a great theme runs through the Old Testament and into the New, that God speaks to us in silence. Think of Psalm 46. "Be still and know that I am God." Think of Elijah on Mount Horeb, at that moment where he's lost his faith and he goes up onto the mountain and God speaks to him not in the earthquake or the wind or the flames, but God speaks to him in the silence. As we enter into the New Testament, there's a great stillness that surrounds Jesus, particularly in the resurrection stories. As we hear of those disciples, they meet the risen Christ, there is a great stillness around Jesus. Think of the words that he says to those disciples, both the first time he enters the upper room, but also the time with Thomas. He says, "Peace, be still. Peace be with you." It's reminiscent of the words he says on the boat as there calms the storm. "Peace, be still." And Jesus brings a sense of stillness to those moments. What happens to Thomas? Now, Thomas is a man who is clearly an anxious man. We don't know where Thomas is the first time Jesus appears in the upper room. We don't know what's happened to him. There's many theories that go on. What was he doing? My own take on it is that he was a man who was greatly perturbed. In the other encounters of Thomas in John's Gospel, we see a man who's always asking questions, always concerned. He's a man who is anxious. And so I imagine, and this is only me imagining, that I imagine Thomas was just not there because he couldn't keep still. Think about what we're like when we're anxious and when we're afraid. We move, we keep ourselves busy, we go off and do things because we can't keep still. We cannot find peace. And this is exactly what happens to Thomas, I think, that he goes out and he's just doing things. Where should he be? He should be there in that room with the other disciples, but he's not there. But when Jesus appears that second time, Thomas is there this time. And Jesus doesn't require Thomas to say anything or do anything. He just stands before Thomas and he says, Thomas, having said, peace be with you, he says, just look, see my hands. Put your finger here. Touch the wounds on my side. It is in that moment of stillness that Thomas encounters the risen Christ. Thomas experiences the very presence of God. It's only then that Thomas can say, my Lord and my God. I think that we are living in very anxious times. I believe that we live in a society, in a world where there's so much going on, so much fear, so much anxiety that penetrate our worlds. Think of the issues about climate change, and we've got issues about Brexit. Remember Brexit, and issues of our borders, of refugees. We have issues over the future of our NHS. And our education system, and we have issues about our economy. And there are all sorts of things going on in our world, in our lives. There's nationalism going on. There's all sorts of things happening. And there's so much activity, so much fear that surrounds our world. We've just kept ourselves busy trying to deal with these things. And the church is no different. When we look at the church, we see a church that seeks to deal with all the issues. We're worried about the church buildings, our finances. We're worried about the numbers in our churches. We're worried about our future, and we're anxious, and so we're always busy. We're always doing things. We're always keeping ourselves doing stuff, allowing ourselves to find ways to deal with the situation. But today, at the moment, we've been given a situation where we cannot do anything. We're given a situation where we're invited to be still. And I just wonder if this time is a gift to us. It doesn't mean the things have gone away, and we still have issues, and obviously the issues of coronavirus as well. There are still things going on, but in the midst of it all, we cannot do anything. And instead, we're invited to be still. John Pritchard, who was the former Bishop of Oxford, writes this. I read this week from him. We may think that an all-singing, all-dancing church life is attractive in an age of entertainment, but I suspect that a church that knows how to be still and to go deep is even more in tune with the needs of our time. When was the last time that you had a chance to be still? When was the last time that you took time out to be silent and to listen to the voice of God? Maybe you do this all the time, and maybe it's something that you're very used to. But if you're like me, maybe you're also someone who likes to be busy and keep doing things, trying to find solutions. Maybe this time is an opportunity to reflect and to see what God has in store for us. For the people of Israel, God spoke to them by revealing a new way, a way forward that they hadn't ever expected. For Elijah, God reveals to him that there are others out there with him, and he is not alone. For the disciples, the silence meant that they experienced the risen Christ among them. How will God reveal himself to us? The invitation is to take time to be quiet and to listen afresh to the voice of God. Maybe then God will bless us. Maybe then we will hear the way forward that will calm our anxieties and our fears. I invite you this Eastertide to reflect, to be quiet, and to allow God to speak to you afresh. And may God bless you this Easter. May he remind you of his love, his peace, and his light. Amen.